I've got something for you that's news. People have not heard, and I think is very important. Inflation has been receding, but there are two areas where it has not been, and that's the reason so many people think the economy is bad. One is food prices, but the other is rents. Rents have gone up 30% in the last 4 years. Well, it turns out that ProPublica last year did an investigation into the fact that a very large segment of housing now, rental housing, individual homes and apartments, are owned by big corporations. Those used to be mom and pop or a bunch of rich investors in a community would own these things. Now they're owned by big corporations. They've been using a software product called Real Pages. One word, real as in real estate, pages. And at that website, the company brags, using our web information, you can get the highest possible prices. When the market's down, you're going to make money. When the market's up, you're going to make money. You're going to be able to charge the highest rents. That is an open declaration of collusion in violation of the 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act. Well, the FBI yesterday raided the Atlanta headquarters of Real Pages. You will not find a single mention of this today from the AP, the New York Times, the Washington Post. All the mainstream media have missed this. It's in the real estate specialty publications and some bloggers. And this is a really important development, particularly about this legitimate concern people have that rents have been going up faster than the economy.
Think about the community of people affected by that. Exactly.
It's enormous. About 65% of Americans own their home. More than half of them have mortgages, but about 65%. So you're talking about roughly a third of Americans live in rental properties. And there's still lots of mom and pop rental firms. On the other hand, when you have a coordinated, collusive action to violate the Sherman Antitrust Act, which, by the way, is a criminal law. Price fixing is a crime. That allows everybody else to push their prices up. Oh, thank you for putting up, if you're watching folks online, the the ProPublica piece is now being shown.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
so I'm
Tony.
sure you'll put a link to it.
Yep, we will indeed.
And then one other thing I wanted to get out of the way that I think is important. Donald Trump gave an interview to Fox. It's been commented a lot that it was very heavily edited and oddly edited and what was edited out. But he said something very important. I warned people in 2016, if Donald gets to the White House and he starts firing the generals and the admirals, be very afraid, because that's how you take over the government. You get rid of the people like Mark Milley who honor their constitutional oath. And remember, grunts and sailors take an oath to follow the orders of the president and protect the Constitution. But officers only take an oath to defend the Constitution. They do not have a loyalty oath to the president. Well, Trump announced on Fox that he's going to fire all the woke generals. We can't have woke generals in the media, in the military. Excuse me, that's exactly what you want, because the military needs to be aware of all the cultures and places that we deal with around the world and their differences, and have respect for them to be successful. And it's an indication of how Donald doesn't know anything about anything, but especially military matters. But he pledged he's going to fire all of them. If he gets back to the White House, the day he fires the first high-level general, that's the day people should realize he really will be our dictator if we don't stop him.
Well, if you have the military, David, that's the whole game, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we have had a military that has been absolutely subordinate to civilian rule. You can like or dislike things like when Truman fired General MacArthur over his disrespectful comments, when General McChrystal, both of these men, very highly competent, high-level generals, were fired, one by Truman, one by Obama. There was no question that you serve at the pleasure of the president when you're a high-level officer, and you can be removed. And Donald wants to remove people not because they've been, in McChrystal's case, he said all sorts of just outrageous things to a Rolling Stone magazine reporter about Obama. Were disrespectful. Donald wants to do it because, of course, he really believes that he should be in charge, not just of America, but the whole world. I mean, you and I. So.
Yeah, when ignorance meets arrogance, that's a noisy street corner with that accident.
That's a great line.
I want to ask you about something else. You mentioned ProPublica. They did a piece about those who are receiving significant financial benefits for testifying in defense of former President Donald Trump. They flowed from Trump's businesses, these benefits have, and also from campaign committees. According to ProPublica, they analyzed public disclosure, court records, and security filings. One campaign aide had his average monthly pay double from $26,000 to $53,500. Another employee got a $2 million severance package, barring him from voluntarily cooperating with law enforcement. And one of the campaign's top officials had her daughter hired onto the campaign staff, where she is now the fourth highest paid employee. This is all for cooperation with Trump's defense.
Right. And I really want the audience to understand something. Most news is an accurate recounting of the official and public version of events. The president said this, the Senate passed a bill, the mayor gave a speech, so-and-so company announced the new product or their earnings. This story was pieced together brilliantly by, I think there's 4 bylines on that story. I know 3 of the people very well, where they went through all sorts of disparate public records and found the facts to report this story. This is not news that was announced. This is news they dug up. And of course, Donald paid off people to be cooperative. Alan Weiselberg, who got the $2 million, is right now sitting in Rikers Island. And there are bad jails, and then there's Rikers Island for 150 days because he lied under oath at the persistent fraud trial before Judge Engoron. And this is how Donald does business. He tried to bribe the late, great Wayne Barrett, the first journalist who got onto Donald and seriously began covering him. Wayne worked for 40 years for the Village Voice, and yet he had the most extraordinary sources in the FBI, New York detectives. I mean, he just was deeply, deeply respected by these folks who cooperated with him all the time. And he told Wayne, well, listen, here's this multi-million-dollar Trump Tower apartment. I'll give it to you if you stop writing about me this way. That's what Donald does. He pays people off to shut up, as he did with, by the way, the 2 women.
Sure. I mean,
if I just continue, there's a new development in this I want to make sure we don't miss. During the second impeachment of Donald Trump, which occurred after he left office, the Republican leadership, most notably Mitch McConnell, all said he's gone from office. We shouldn't be engaged in this impeachment. No reason you can't do it. And because the courts can deal with him. And Mitch McConnell explicitly indicated he expected there to be court action against Donald Trump. Well, we just saw that the courts dealt with Donald Trump. He's been convicted of 34 felonies. And what is the leadership of the Republican Party doing? Completely rigged system. The criminal justice system has been weaponized. It's being used against Republicans. By the way, the president of the United States' son is on trial right now because the president of the United States, Joe Biden, kept Donald Trump's prosecutor on the job to this day and expanded his power. Merrick Garland expanded his powers. Senator Menendez of New Jersey, a Democrat, is on trial today. And Congressman, I'm not sure I can pronounce this right, Cuellar of Texas is on trial today as well, and he's a Democrat. So it's kind of hard to make the argument that they've weaponized the Justice Department against Republicans.
Well, yesterday I just made the same point, and it stopped at Hunter. I mean, you point out these others so well, but I stopped at Hunter and said, do you really believe that a Trump child would be on trial? Trump would allow it to go forward? It would be, it's crazy.
Not possible.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, and the Democrats really cut their own throats a bit, but they also honor a system that they feel and the institutions that they feel are significant. So, I mean, for that, I suppose you got to give them credit. But I think they're looking for credit from the other side, and you'll never get credit from the GOP for doing that.
No.
I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned Trump and the trial, so I'll just get to that first. Because I love that piece. I do want to double back because that you detail in the piece that you wrote after the Trump guilty verdict some things that are really interesting. But I wanted to ask you about a question we had, which is, with Trump smack talking the judge the way he is and his sentencing coming up, it's an odd thing to reconcile, because normally wouldn't you counsel David K. Johnston, someone who's been found guilty, to kind of, hey, chill out on smack talking the judge?
Yeah, years ago I wrote about a lot of tax deniers, and there were 15 of them who were convicted and went to prison. Some of them for so long they died in prison. And there was a couple I wrote about in, I think it was Sacramento, who went to their sentencing and they got fairly light sentences. They got some prison time, but it was nowhere near what they could have gotten. And they immediately stood up and said, you're corrupt. The whole system is dishonest. They went into this tirade, and the judge just patiently listened to them and then doubled their sentences. So the husband got, I think, 16 years instead of 8. Every public commentary show I've been watching, most of which I've been on in one time or another, lawyers left and right, Republicans and Democrats, law professors are all saying, oh, Trump probably won't get any jail time. I think that's completely wrong. I think John absolutely will get jail time. I'll be shocked if he doesn't get at least 30 days. And I would expect he'd get somewhere between 1 and 4 years. And he'll be ordered to report sometimes, he'll be given 10 days or 30 days to report after the July 11th sentencing, because he's a recalcitrant criminal. If you show contrition, I realize now I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. I apologize to the court. I apologize to the victims of my crimes. You tend to get leniency, and people lie about that, by the way. They're not, we had one of the January 6th insurrectionists who said all the right things in court and then proceeded to start sending out emails and posting on blogs, that was nonsense. And, he still wants to overthrow the government, and he got hauled back into court. Michael Cohen was prosecuted by the Trump Justice Department for the same incidents, a different theory of the crime and a federal crime rather than state. And he was sentenced to 3 years in prison, of which he served, I think, 15 months. That I just can't imagine that Judge Merchan would say, oh, you get informal probation, or you have house arrest at Trump Tower. And if he does do house arrest, I certainly hope it's at Trump Tower, not at Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster, where he can play golf. I mean, that would be sort of meaningless. That's just stay at home in a way that wouldn't bother Trump for a minute.
Does but your point is so well taken on the fact that the lack of contrition, and it's really the opposite of contrition, right? This the continued fire-breathing dragon that Trump is toward the judge in the process. If that does come back to bite him, will what you suggested, which is that there would actually be a jail sentence, wait until his appeal is done, or exactly how is that disposed of?
That's up to the judge. The judge can say, that was my point. He'll be sentenced July 11th. The Republican Party nomination begins in Milwaukee on the 15th, 4 days later. So if the judge gives him a week or 10 days, that's fairly common, 30 days. What Trump will do immediately is his lawyers will go and try and find some judge who will block his being incarcerated. And already you've seen Mike Johnson, the speaker, say that the Supreme Court should intervene. There is no constitutional issue here. This is not an issue of a minority defendant or religious minority defendant who's being discriminated against. We're talking about a wealthy white man. I mean, I'm sorry, what's the most privileged group in America? But they will try to do that. They will try to get a temporary restraining order and then a temporary and then a permanent injunction to keep from jailing him. That should not happen. It is entirely within the discretion of the judge to jail Trump for up to 4 years. And you know where the news will go if the judge does this. Well, see, this is the Biden conspiracy. No, this is an elected state judge, a jury of Trump's peers from Manhattan well-educated jury, and a locally elected prosecutor. And, it's not like this is out of nowhere. I mean, after all, let's see. Donald Trump's fixer is a convicted felon. His former chief of campaign chief, Paul Manafort's a convicted felon. Manafort's deputy is a convicted felon. His national security advisor, General Flynn, is a convicted felon. I mean, he's just surrounded by criminals.
You used a phrase in the piece that I really liked, and we're going to link to the piece. I think we already linked once in another video last week, but I want to link to it again. After the Trump sentence, after the Trump verdict, David kind of wrote a sort of a summary piece, if you will, on some of the stuff that looks back at the way Trump has done business and the way Trump has tried to buy people out, some of which you've alluded to here today. But you used a phrase that was really great, and you do, I think, attribute it to Wayne Barrett, who you also have talked about today, who is a journalist, a great journalist in the Trump investigative world as well. And it's moral larceny. And I thought that was just, it's a terrific term. And then you do build it out. Could you speak to us about that for a second?
Yeah, that was Wayne's term. And Wayne was like, I don't know, my big brother. He was this just unbelievably brilliant and dogged beyond anything I can imagine investigative reporter. Couldn't write to save his life. He kept trying to write. He kept trying to persuade me to write a book with him, and I would say, "Wayne, I love you dearly, and we'll kill each other if we do a book together." But he, nobody could out-report. He was the best. He was the best single reporter in New York City for 40 years, and Wayne got onto Trump in the 70s. I came along 10 years later, and everything in between, except for Wayne, was, hagiography, praising coverage of Trump. Wayne had this great observation that every time Trump makes a deal, he can't just make a deal. He has to somehow put the knife into your wallet. And Wayne called that moral larceny. And I think that very well captured it, which is why I use it. This is the piece my best friend David Crook wrote the headline for, "We Told You So!" ! And the lead I wrote was, Donald Trump is a felon. I've waited 36 years to write that lead ever since I became the first journalist to talk about Donald Trump becoming president of the United States. Because when I wrote that article in 1988, July of 1988, I thought to myself, my God, this guy is a criminal and he might get to the White House someday. And what a horror that would be for the world.
Well, you did actually forecast his conviction here before. We have another very distinguished legal analyst who comes in on Thursdays who actually pivoted, said, I don't think he'll be found guilty. I think they'll convict on the misdemeanors, but they won't actually put it on. The misdemeanors, of course, don't matter because of statute of limitations, et cetera. But then he pivoted to your position, which is that he'll be found guilty. But you were the first one to come forward. Once you'd seen the case, you didn't just state this reflexively. But you're on to, as you say, the master con artist becoming the American president. Those are your words from this piece. You were on to that early. But again, you point out all of these different things, and you even point out in this piece, and again, we'll link to it in this video, you point out how he tried to co-opt you. Trump tried to co-opt you.
And I outsmarted him. I had lunch one day with Donald at Trump's castle, one of his casinos. And during lunch, we both ordered steaks. His looked like, dried shoe leather, and mine was deliberately ordered rare. I usually have medium rare because I know that it upsets Donald to see anything that looks like a rare steak. And I wanted to capture his reaction to this. And listen, that's what journalists do. I mean, I once sent a journalism student to interview the owner of the Santa Cruz newspaper about all the things they were hiding from the viewers. And I just told her, pay attention to how you dress. And so she dressed in a way that got this guy's mind going, and he just confessed every sin they had committed.
Wow.
And she was, by the way, perfectly appropriately dressed, but it was in a way that, old man stopped thinking with his brain.
Sure.
And so, Donald got a phone call. And so he left. And I called the waiter over to tell him, make sure that you bill me give me a bill. He said, Donald won't do that. And I said, I have to pay you. And he said, wait till he leaves. And then I paid for my lunch. Well, my son, Andrew, wanted to come along because he wanted to meet Trump. He was 17 then, my middle son. And Donald comes back. We have lunch. Donald told me, Andy tells me he shook Trump's hand. 2 days later, a messenger arrives at my home with a framed picture of Andy and Donald, in which he's written, Andy, your father's a great man, or you have a great father, something like that, with his Sharpie pen. And I immediately realized Trump would use this to get me taken off coverage of him. He would say that I said, if you don't do this and sign this, what I tell you to say, I'm going to write bad stories about you. And Trump thought he had me. And I know from one of his executives, he boasted to him, he figured out how to get rid of me. So what we did, the Philadelphia Inquirer, is I sent the casino a check for $175 for the photo. And they sent it back by messenger. So then we gave $175 in Donald Trump's name to a charity that feeds people, one of these food bank charities, and sent Donald you had to sign to get the certified mail to New York, and a copy to the casino that we had made this gift to cover the cost of the photograph. And of course, that completely took it. Yeah, you've got Andy's picture up there. It completely took that away from Donald. We outsmarted him. But he got rid of a Wall Street Journal reporter, ended his career as a journalist through one of these little tricks like this. And so when I would go see Donald, I would never take anything except a glass of water or a cup of coffee, because those are those are pleasantries. They're not payoffs.
Sure.
When we had lunch, I insisted I had to pay for it. I had to wait till he left, and then I paid for my lunch and had a receipt. And by the way, the Inquirer was very nice. They let me, because even though it was my son who kind of screwed up here, and he got a rather long talking to about it, they let me.
Your son screwed up in taking a picture with him, you mean? Or
yeah. I had told him, he knew enough that Donald was troublesome. This was kind of sophisticated for him. But in any event, the Inquirer let me put the $175 on my expense account, which was very nice. They didn't have to do that.
Well, you talk about news coverage, and you obviously adhere to sort of a very serious code of investigative journalism. But you talk about news coverage moving forward, how Trump has been covered, and there are certain conventions of coverage that Donald Trump has been able to take advantage of. There's certain kind of norms that just don't exist anymore. And that's one of the reasons you started DC Report, because
right.
you thought, yeah.
So here's the core problem. Most journalism, as I said earlier in the show, is an accurate recounting of the official version of events. I'm in the unofficial version of events business. You need both. But the conventions of journalism, particularly political journalism, do not take into account a con artist. So you can have somebody with odious views, Strom Thurmond before he claimed to no longer be a racist, or Governor Wallace. And they get covered well and thoughtfully because they fall within the parameters of, well, this person is a legitimate promoter of a point of view. And journalism can deal very well with that. You can be a far-out lefty revolutionary, a Maoist. You can be a super right-wing Genghis Khan a character, and journalism can deal with that. But it's not equipped to deal with a con artist. And there's a very tiny segment of us, even within investigative reporters, who have the experience and the skill and the knowledge to deal with con artists posing as politicians. And that's what Donald Trump is doing. He doesn't know anything but power and self-aggrandizement and money. And he himself declares openly, I'm going to be a dictator just for the first day. And news organizations then treat that like, oh, that was, it's a joke. No, it's not a joke. He's telling you what he's going to do. And Donald understands how to manipulate those constraints and how to play the game on his behalf. And A good example, by the way, is I was on somebody else's show yesterday, and the person said, well, Trump had this press conference. And I said, wait a minute, stop. He did not have a press conference. He came out and made a statement. A press conference implies that you ask questions, you take questions from the journalists. And yet I see every day, Trump's holding a press conference. No, he's not. So this is a real core problem. And I don't think that we've been perfect about it at DC Report, trying to figure out how to do it, but we've done a lot better than most people. Even today, by that I mean the current weeks, Peter Baker, this brilliant White House specialist at the New York Times, he used to be at the Washington Post. He's the greatest living journalistic authority on the presidency. He had a piece the other day that my fellow former New York Times people have been ripping apart, because in the piece he treats Donald Trump like he's just a politician with these peculiar views. He's a criminal. He's a con artist. And if Peter Baker can't get it right, he's the top dog in White House coverage, far and away. If Peter Baker and his wife, who also does the same thing for the New Yorker, can't get it right, there's not much hope for the rest of us. And the conventions have served the public well. So the problem is you need to expand beyond them. And unfortunately, news organizations are incredibly conservative in terms of how they operate and the rules they work under and behavior. They're very resistant to change, much more so than a lot of businesses. And all businesses are inherently conservative about what they're doing.
Sure. I'd love to talk to you about what's happening next time. We'll talk about what's happening at the Washington Post. It's a serious, serious problem there. They've got real problems.
The new editor is himself a guy who's done very bad things that he could have gone to prison for. So we should be very concerned and worried about what's going to happen there at the Washington Post.
And that so many people with great access and great takes work there at that paper, and now, yeah, as I say, real problems. Last thing, David, really, this is the truly last thing. This is a guy in Donald Trump who's hundreds of millions of dollars now under having to settle these court judgments and penalties for many of these things to which you referred. What is the future for him?
Well, Donald's future is endless litigation until he dies. And even though he doesn't exercise and eats a terrible diet, his parents lived into their 90s, so you can certainly expect he'll live into his 80s. He is not in good health. My little fantasy belief is if we do have a debate, and I don't believe Trump will show up, that Biden drops to the floor and does one-arm push-ups and then says to Donald when he gets up, Donald, you can use both hands, because Trump wouldn't be able to do push-ups. He faces endless litigation. He eventually will end up bankrupt, because what he has is this house of cards. I mean, how many billionaires do you know who go around trying to hawk vodka and Bibles and gold tennis shoes, and furthermore are constantly asking for donations, especially when Trump said in 2015, I'm so rich, I don't need any donations. I'm not going to take money from anybody. And now he's begging. And I do mean begging. If you get his emails, as I do, they beg for money. And because it's always been a facade. He's not poor. I don't want to mislead people. He is a wealthy man. But, he's in the $100 million class. And as two multi-billionaires who are well-known public figures told me when I interviewed them about this, if you can spend $20 million a year, that much cash, spend it. You can absolutely fake being a billionaire. Well, that's Donald. He just fakes it.
Well, as to the begging, I mean, he just made essentially a deal with big oil, the CEOs of fossil fuel companies, right, and other CEOs. There was one fundraiser he made where he essentially made the deal. You guys write the legislation, and I'll let you, drill, baby, drill.
I think arguably what Trump said in that meeting meets the much higher standard our Supreme Court has said for bribery and extortion. When Governor McDonnell of Virginia and his wife received, $50,000 watches, they got to use a $400,000 sports car, shopping sprees and everything else, the Supreme Court threw out the conviction on the grounds that there was no direct quid pro quo. It wasn't you sign this piece of legislation in return for these gifts. It was just the governor broadly helping this company get favors from the legislature and the bureaucracy in the state. If Trump literally said, give me $1 billion and you guys can write whatever legislation you want, and he has said publicly he will get rid of the Education Department, the Interior Department, and most of the Environmental Protection Agency, I think those are chargeable crimes because those are quid pro quos under the standard. And this, let me be very clear, the Supreme Court has basically legalized bribery for anybody who isn't stupid enough to announce a quid pro quo. As long as you don't say, give me the money and I'll do this for this specific act, the Supreme Court says that's not a crime. Well, Trump just did.
This just happened a couple of weeks ago in Houston, with oil executives. And he said, and the complaint was from the CEO of Occidental Petroleum that the merger was taking too long. And he said, put me in office, give me a couple of months and I'll okay it. Don't even worry about it. Give me the money.
And that is a quid pro quo because he asked for money. And of course, if he becomes president, he won't be prosecuted for anything. And he'll probably test out his belief that he can order his opponents killed.
Wow, that's a chilling thought, but it's all chilling.
Trust me, dictatorship ultimately leads to firing squads, and it may take a little time, it may take a long time, but it is an inevitable result of any. Look around the world at the dictatorships we know about going back 200 years. They're firing squads, and if he acts quickly, I will not be one bit surprised if I'm one of the people who gets lined up and shot.
Oh my God, jeez.
So, that's why it matters that he doesn't get to the White House.
Yeah.
Among other reasons.
I mean, your forecasts have been fairly accurate, and you don't think he'll get to the White House.
I've only missed out of all the things I brought up, Mark, I've only missed one, and it will come true eventually. I said that he might file a strategic bankruptcy to delay the civil judgments against him. He managed to get bonds, so he didn't have to get bonded. So he didn't have to do that. But the day will come when Donald will absolutely have to file bankruptcy unless he gets back to the White House. And then,
But again, but to reiterate, you don't think he'll get back to the White House.
I think it is highly unlikely. He will lose the popular vote by a minimum of 10 million votes, but he only has to win 6 states that are in play.
Right.
And the Democrats have a long history of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. To win, all the Democrats have to do is have a powerful ground game in those 6 states. Now, there's a story in the New York Times, and apparently it's been replicated elsewhere, that leaders of the European Union countries believe Trump will be back in the White House. They believe that will unleash Putin to begin trying to conquer all of Europe. What I've talked about on the show is 50 years of warfare trying to stop the Russians from taking over the rest of Europe. And so they're planning for that. Well, as a contingency, that makes sense. I think it is not likely Trump will get there, but if people don't act like this is the most terrifying thing in their lives, as they should, complacency, that will put Trump back in the White House. You got to register to vote and you got to turn out the vote. That's what happens at elections at the end of the day, is who votes.
David, thank you for your time. Love your piece. We'll link to it. The DC Report piece really summarizes so much of the style and strategy of Donald Trump. And I enjoy our talks. I look for next week.
See you next week.
Okay. David K. Johnston, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped. And please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.